Hello, how you doing? We are here at Anthropology 101, Introduction to Anthropology, and I am Anthony Balzano. I'm the instructor for this course for the fall 2024 and spring 2025 semesters. And this lecture is for the 2024-2025 academic year in Intro to Anthropology, Anthro 101. Now, we are at Sussex County Community College. We're in Newton, New Jersey, and you can contact me with any questions about this recording at abalzano@sussex.edu, and I'll answer them. Okay. Now, today, what we want to do is we want to cover Chapter 1 in our textbook, The Human Story, by Alexandra Brewis and 4 other authors. We're not going to mention all 5 authors. We're just going to call this the Brewis text. So here is our quick lecture. We'll try to keep every lecture at about 20 minutes for Brewis Chapter 1 in The Human Story. And in this chapter, what we do is we want to describe and define what anthropology is. And we also want to talk about what do anthropologists do? How do they do it? And the last thing we want to talk about is what brings all anthropologists together. What is it that all anthropologists do, no matter, what they are? Now, there's 4 kinds of anthropology, okay? And we're going to cover all of them in intro. We have individual courses here at Sussex County Community College in 3 of those 4. So the 4 are biological anthropology, archaeology, cultural anthropology, and linguistics anthropology. And we have courses here. We have separate courses on cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, and archaeology. We don't have a course here at the community college level in linguistics anthropology. So let's describe what these 4 fields are, and then what we'll talk about is what makes them anthropological, and then we'll talk about what brings them all together. What do all of them do that makes them anthropology? Okay. So the first one is biological anthropology, and biological anthropology is, it's the study of human origins. It's the study of the human body. It's the study of our primate ancestors. Okay. That is, we have a common ancestry with monkeys and apes and prosimians. We didn't evolve from them, okay, but we have common ancestry with them. Biological anthropologists use an evolutionary perspective, which is what we'll go into in later chapters in a lot of detail, okay? One of the first things we study in biological anthropology, or what they do, is they study human genetics. There's a lot to know about humans by studying their genes. We know a lot more now than we did back when I took this course in 1970, okay, at the University of Wisconsin. It was a very different kind of course back then. The other big thing that biological anthropologists study are human remains, human fossils. We want to look at the fossil record. And those are the kind of biological anthropologists we call paleoanthropologists. And not just ancient humans, but ancient pre-humans. There were other species of humans: Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo habilis, and others, Homo naledi. Okay. And we want to study them as well. And they looked a little bit different. Their stature was a little bit different. Sometimes their foot was a little different. Sometimes their teeth were a little bit different. So biological anthropologists study that as well. They also study the way the human body is shaped differently by diet and by culture and by environment. And we want to look at those kind of differences too. One specialty that some biological anthropologists go into is forensic anthropology. Studying how people may have met their demise in an unfortunate way, during a criminal act. That's what they focus on. How did this person die? How were they crushed, murdered, tortured? All of that, all those not so nice things. Forensic anthropologists get into that. We'll cover that as well when we go into when we get into those chapters. Biological anthropologists, as well as all anthropologists, take an evolutionary perspective. Okay, now when we do that, we don't want you to set aside your belief system as to what you may have learned in your upbringing about where humans came from. But in this course in anthropology, we want to look at the way scientists have determined what human origins are. Okay, a second kind of anthropology is archaeology. It's the study of past cultures. Archaeologists do excavations and surveys of ancient artifacts, ecofacts like the pollen or the trees that were left behind that those humans did something with, features that they may have left behind, such as monoliths or mounds of dirt, to try to interpret what that culture was like. Archaeologists need to not just find these things, but then they need to come up with an interpretation of what they thought that went on. What in fact exactly happened here? There's so many great examples that we'll give you when we get onto those chapters. Okay. A third kind of anthropology is cultural anthropology. I'm a cultural anthropologist. Okay. I did my research in rural Haiti on agricultural systems. Cultural anthropologists, what they want to look at when they look at a culture that's different from their own is how people do things differently within that culture, not just from their own culture, but within. That is, we want to look at the intra-cultural diversity. That the last thing we would ever find is that anybody in any culture doing everything the same. Okay. Here, everybody in our culture, everybody does something a little bit different, okay? And the same thing happens when you look at other cultures too. And that's what we want to start to document, the within, the culture, the diversity within that culture. We want to document that. We want to document what the issues are, what they discuss, what kind of differences they have. And that's going to start to tell us a lot about what that culture is. The other important thing to look at in a culture is what has symbolic meaning. What is super important that gives meaning, that triggers their emotions, that they put a lot of belief in. Okay, what is it different? What is it that is different about that culture in terms of their belief system? It could be the food can be symbolic. A song can be symbolic. The way they build their homes could be done in a symbolic way. Of course, they are. Okay, the clothing they wear, the jewelry they wear, whether or not, as this chapter points out, how they file their teeth. Okay, to be a mark of beauty. Okay, or to be functional in some way. Cultural anthropologists are going to look at those kinds of things. Another important perspective for cultural anthropologists is the way we use the word colonialism in really two different ways. Okay, so we could talk about the way in which people from northeastern Asia colonized North America and South America, or the way in which people from Southeast Asia colonized the South Pacific, Tahiti, Samoa, Fiji, and eventually Hawaii. Okay, that's one kind of colonization. And when people do that, we'll talk about them as being the indigenous people of that land, the indigenous people of Samoa, or of the Americas, or of Australia. Okay, but the other kind of colonization we'll talk about is military colonization. How European military went into Africa, went into Asia, went into parts of the Americas and colonized those areas for purposes of grabbing resources and using those resources for their own economy. That's another kind of colonization. There's no place in the world that doesn't have, it's not impacted on by colonization and migration, okay? And there's no place in the world where a global, now we can talk about a global economy that's not affected by a global economy. Okay, so we'll see a lot of examples of that kind of perspective. And so that's a big thing in cultural anthropology. Okay, a fourth kind of of anthropology is linguistics anthropology. There's one kind of linguistics anthropology which documents new languages and documents their vocabulary and documents the way in which they talk about things. And they start to work up and develop a dictionary of that language. That's one kind of linguistics anthropology. Another kind of linguistics anthropology is to talk about how people use language to mark barriers and to mark social stratification and to mark status. How people within a culture will speak differently to different people depending on who they are. One example is in terms of code switching. We all kind of code switch a little bit depending on who we're speaking with. We'll use different kind of words and we'll use different kind of manners of speech. I can't talk like this to my family and friends. They'll kick me out of the room. Okay, I could talk like this to you. This is almost a type of code switching. So that's a very different kind of linguistics work that's done. Okay. So those are the four fields of anthropology, and just always keep in mind that whatever the anthropologist does, they are usually doing it for always keeping in mind that they're going to use the information that they're gathering, whether it's of a past culture or it's something about a disease of a different society. They're going to use it to try to apply it to solve problems. Okay, and Chapter 1 has a little bit of a section in there about how knowledge of a culture will help that society solve particular kind of problems. Okay. Now, what all anthropologists have in common is all anthropologists do field work. Okay, they have to get out there for minimally, usually at least a year to do field work, sometimes 3 or 4 years, depending on your research project. You're going to go on an excavation that may take you 3 or 4 years on an archaeology project. I did my dissertation field work, but it took 16 months, okay, to live in rural Haiti and do that. So all anthropologists do field work, no matter what you're doing. The other thing that all anthropologists do is they use cross-cultural comparisons to try to make sense of the data that they're collecting, comparing one culture with another culture. Your book, Chapter 1, does this in looking at how people bring different kind of meaning to their teeth. Okay, how different cultures will end up having different teeth depending on their diet, depending on what beauty is. We straighten our teeth. Other cultures may file their teeth. Other cultures may remove their incisors. Some cultures will alter their teeth because of the kind of language that they speak. So cross-cultural comparisons. Sometimes we'll even do cross-species comparisons. Certainly biological anthropologists do that. Usually the species we're comparing ourselves with are bonobos and chimpanzees. Okay, those are bonobo is a kind of a similar kind of species to a chimpanzee, except they behave very, very differently. They have different kind of temperaments, different kind of social structures too. So we'll talk a lot about chimps and bonobos. But one kind of cross-species comparison we can make is how the females give birth to their young. Okay, Homo sapiens women, human women, give birth to their young with the aid of other females usually. All right. We've probably did this from before we were Homo sapiens. It's very difficult for females, humans, Homo sapiens or Homo neanderthalensis to give birth because we're bipedal, we're up on 2 legs, and our birth canal is much narrower, so they need aid doing it. Whereas chimpanzees and bonobos, they really don't need any aid in giving birth. Although it's been observed among some bonobos to actually help. One female may help another female actually give birth, but not too much. Okay. The other thing that all anthropologists do, whether it's an archaeologist, cultural, or linguist, is they take a global perspective. Okay, like I had mentioned that before. There's no society and no culture that's really totally isolated. Okay. So they're always going to be doing that. The last thing that all cultural anthropologists do is they follow a similar code of ethics, okay? And that code of ethics will say, number one is do no harm. Two is to be totally transparent about who you are and what you're doing and what you're going to be doing about with the data that you get. The other thing that you have to do is informed consent is another code of ethics. You have to ask people if you could take their photograph. You have to ask people whether you could ask them questions. You have to ask people whether or not you could use their name. Okay, informed consent is real important. Another part of code of ethics is to share your data with other scientists who ask for it. Now, not just anybody. I'm not going to give my data to just anybody. I'm going to give my data to somebody who is going to ask for it. In fact, as I stand here, I'm looking at all of my field notes, which are actually a really big pile of my field notes that I took. That's about half the pile there. If anybody comes and asks me about something I observed back in 1985 and 1986, who's another researcher, I would give it to them. So you need to share your data. The other important part about what all anthropologists do is they should give back to the communities where they did their field work. And so I've always kept in touch with rural Haiti, a place known as Fan des Blancs. I'll say that many times during the semester to help them with whatever questions they have and to help them in any way that I can and to keep abreast of what is going on there to aid them like that. Okay, so those are the major points in Chapter 1. Now, keep track in Chapter 1 of all of the cool things they say about teeth. Okay, now there's a great question for the exam. How do different kinds of anthropologists, how do they integrate possibly teeth into their work? So you can see how all four of those fields will take a very different perspective about how teeth can tell us something about a culture. Okay, thanks.